Here is Stratagem, Chapter 3, Part 2. He wasn't doing anything wrong, I whispered. I couldn't help it. I knew it would get me in trouble, and I knew my speaking up could make me appear vulnerable, but I hated seeing someone picked on. All three of the guys turned to me, stunned I had spoken. Only Aaron came at me. He was across the room in seconds. He grabbed the armrests on my chair and yanked the chair forward, the wooden legs slamming on the floor with a thump. I flinched. He spoke with a quiet intensity that set off an alarm in my head. Why, if Mr. Gray is so important, wasn't there more security detail? His hot breath hit my face. I kept eye contact with him, not wanting to show any signs of weakness. I was startled by his question. He was traveling in the wrong direction if he thought that Gray was the important one, if he thought that they would plant a large security detail around such a secret assignment. My eyes were still damp with the tears I conjured for Dan. I wanted to wipe them away so I didn't look fragile or exposed. Aaron reached out and grabbed my neck. I tried to recoil as he squeezed, but there was nowhere to go. He leaned in close to my face. Behind him, Brody and Dan turned away, unable to watch the sudden brutality. He spit as he talked, and his squeeze was unyielding. I tried to shake off his hand, but I couldn't. I tried to keep my cool, to keep steady, but my brain was reacting to my body's distress at not getting enough oxygen. I gasped, unable to suck in all the air I needed, again trying to shake him off, but his hand was immovable. Finally, with what little breath I had stored, I spoke quickly. Mr. Gray was not important. Aaron let go as soon as I spoke, but I could still feel a phantom hand on my neck, squeezing. I took large gasps of air. As he reached in his pocket, I looked past him to see Dan watching me and Brody trying not to make eye contact with me. Then Aaron pulled out a small electronic device and the keys to the handcuffs. He pushed the device into my face. On the screen, which was smaller than a phone, was an image of a file folder that Aaron clicked open. I couldn't read the words because Aaron shoved it so close to my face. This is Gregory Gray's file. He is a security officer at a small firm. He is single, middle-aged, healthy. What did you want with him? He is unremarkable and inconsequential. Why would the agency send a mimic in? It was a short position, I answered. I breathed slowly, keeping my heart rate low. I would only tell enough to keep them satisfied for the moment, only enough to keep his hands off me until I came up with another plan. Aaron's face deepened a shade of red. My intel is legit. People lost lives for my intel. So quit lying to me and tell me the truth. Who is Mr. Gray? What was the end game, you little freak? His words stung. I decided I really disliked Aaron. Of course, the choking didn't help, and the name-calling didn't either, but also, I wasn't fond of the way he treated Dan, which was curious because I didn't even know Dan. Aaron was a jerk. I set my jaw to keep my cool and lifted my chin at him, holding my head high. My neck burned. I would not give him any more information and tightened my mouth shut. I had a moment of weakness before, but now that I knew who this guy was, what kind of guy he was, I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Aaron raised his eyebrows at my defiance. He stepped closer, but then Brody spoke up. Aaron, I think we need to take a little break. Oh, I'm just getting started. Aaron glared at me. Brody reached over and touched Aaron's shoulder. That broke Aaron's gaze. He motioned at Aaron and shook his head. It was the kind of nonverbal communication that seemed to reference a previous conversation, possibly the talk they'd had outside. Brody considered me. I'll watch her. You guys go lie down. I glared back. I was relieved that Brody stepped in, but I didn't want to show that. Dan began to speak. But what about... Brody shook his head. Aaron slid the device and keys back into his pocket. Come on, he said to Dan. Dan seemed to have forgotten how Aaron had talked to him only moments ago, and he followed Aaron into the bedroom. I followed them with my eyes, and as they opened the door, I could see shapes in the room that looked like bunk beds. When they shut the door, Brody was still staring down at me. He crossed his arms. "That was a pretty neat trick you did, shifting into me." I didn't respond. He motioned toward the bedroom door, and then back at me. "But you shouldn't mess with Aaron. And leave Dan alone, too. Dan might be a nice guy, but he can handle himself. Don't push him." Brody took a few steps away and then turned back. "You should try to get some rest as well. We're in for a long day." It looked like there was one more thing that he wanted to add, but he didn't. He turned away and walked over to a ratty love seat and plopped down with his back turned to me. He didn't look back. I waited to see if he would say more, but he didn't. I didn't trust him. He seemed too nice. There had to be something behind that, some kind of act. Good cop, bad cop. But Dan didn't fit it. He seemed to be along for the ride. Brody and Aaron were the two I had to watch out for, and Aaron was a live wire. And though he worried me, there were bigger things I should be afraid of, like the agency. After a couple minutes, I quietly tried to lift my legs from the chair, but they were tied down tightly, with each foot sternly anchored around the chair leg. My waist and arms up to my elbows were taped around the chair back, and so were my shoulders. My wrists were still cuffed together, and the silver burned a deep red ring into my flesh. I'd gotten a glimpse of the red before Brody covered my hands with the blanket. I tried to rub my wrists together under the blanket to ease the itch when I hit something in my inner pocket. I had completely forgotten about it. My phone.